Following up on a recent edit I did using Content Aware Scale, I cheated in one of the tool demos and I actually showed you some light painting with Photoshop. And we're going to do that again. We're going to continue that. However, in this place, we're going to start with Lightroom because there are certain things that Lightroom just makes easier with the raw file. And this is the raw file we're going to work with. And I brought it in and you can see we've got some highlight clipping. But if you look at where it is, let me hide that so you can see. This is a 1.3 second exposure, and yeah, the sun is hitting here, so would there really be any detail in it to our eyes anyway? And the answer really is no. So let's zoom out of that, and I'm going to turn it on just so you can see what we're going to do here. And this is the stuff that is easier done in either Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. First thing I'm going to do is just bring down the highlights a bit and just get rid of those red spots, and that pretty much gets rid of all of them. While we're at it, let's bring the shadows way up because this was a very high contrast scene. And I'll add a little texture. We're going to do our sharpening in Photoshop in this one, but let's add some life back to the image. We'll bring up the saturation a bit. We've got this really cool moss and lichen covered rocks down the bottom. And now it's starting to look pretty good, and it's going to need some light painting. But we still have the distraction of the very bright top. So let's use a brush. Up here, let's select brush. I'm going to make sure auto mask is turned off. I'm going to make the brush a bit smaller. I just wanted to get everything that's kind of above the falls. And if I end up getting a little too much, that's easy to fix. Hold down the Alt key on your computer. That will turn it to a minus, and then you can bring back the pieces you selected that you do not want to be affected. Because what I want to do is I want to darken up this top so that the viewer's eyes are more prone to go to the waterfall. So let's bring the exposure down on that, and we'll bring the highlights down a little more, and look how much better that looks. So I think we're in pretty good shape now to send this whole thing into Photoshop for all of our light painting. So here's our image in Photoshop. All the stuff we're going to do to this is going to be on layers above. So since we're not actually going to affect the bottom layer, I don't think, we can just leave that alone. But the first thing we're going to do is one of my favorite techniques. And this is one of the basics in Photoshop that everybody needs to know. And that's creating a layer, and we're going to paint with light on it. And I personally find this much more effective, much more powerful, and easier to do than trying to use the burn and dodge tools, which I don't find work that well. So what we're going to do is create a new layer just by clicking on the box down here with the plus sign in it. And we're going to fill it with gray. So let's go to Edit, Fill. And you're going to see that one of the options in Fill is 50% gray when you click there. So there must be a reason for doing that. So let's hit OK, and there we have our 50% gray layer. And the key is to turn this from normal to overlay. And overlay it was called one of the blending modes. And what overlay does is anything on the overlay layer that is lighter than the layer below will lighten the image, and conversely, anything that's darker will darken the image. So it's a great way to paint with light. So you can see now I changed it to overlay, and it becomes transparent because anything that's 50% gray is transparent in overlay. And you can see if I turn it on and off, nothing happens because it's just the gray. The advantage of having the fill in gray is if you want to adjust or see where you've painted, if you paint with white without having that gray, you can't see it. Black you can, white you can't. So it's just kind of a handy thing. It's an optional step, but I find it a good practice to do. So we're just going to get a brush. We have a lot of lightening to do. So I'm going to get a brush, B. Oh, I have it as I was apparently using the pencil not too long ago. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and let's start with the waterfall. So I got my brush. I want to lighten it up. So I'm going to hit X, which will flip black and white in the foreground. So this is foreground background color. You could also click this double-sided arrow, does the same thing. But X is a keyboard shortcut you're going to learn. Just hit X and it does that. So now we've got white there. And then we have to deal with the opacity. Now when you're painting this way, it's cumulative. So if you start at 10% and you keep going over and over again, it keeps adding 10%. So since we're dealing with a very light color, let's start at 10% and see what it does. So I'm just going to click and drag along here. And you can already see how nice a job it's doing, and also some of the areas around it. And that's already looking better. And we can turn this on and off, and you can see, look what we've done just by doing that. Is there anything else we want to highlight in here? Oh, maybe add a little bit of light over here. I don't see any happy little trees that need to be lightened up. So actually maybe here. I like the top of this rock. There's something interesting about the base of it. And maybe the same thing here and here. You can see we've got a little bit of blur because this is almost a 1.5 second exposure. There was a bit of a breeze. So some of the ferns are moving, but nobody cares. All right, I think that looks pretty good with the white. Let's do some with black. So I'm going to hit the X key, and now we have black in our brush. And where do I want to put black? Well, areas that I don't necessarily want the eye to go. I want you to see it, but maybe not linger. 10% is still good. I'm going to paint along this left edge. I want you to be able to see these rocks and this moss, but I don't want it as strong as the ones in the middle, because I want you to go to those others. So this one on the far right here is a little too light. So yeah, I just did 5 strokes over top of that. And maybe this corner up in here. Let's darken that. And maybe again a little more in here, up into these trees. These highlights are okay. I'm not bothered by them. And that's starting to look pretty good. And now let's see what we've got. You can see here's our overlay layer. If we change it back to normal, you get to see here's all the white and dark that I painted on top of this. Put it back to overlay, and now let's turn it on and off so you can see what we've accomplished by doing this. Look at the difference, and look how it changes where you looked. Without the overlay layer, your eyes have a tendency to go to the moss-covered rocks first, and the waterfall is more of an afterthought or a second thing you'll head to. By our light painting, now the waterfall is stronger, and then the other parts of the rocks we visit are here and here right across this top. I may want to do a little bit of cropping on this. This rock on the bottom is so strong, although I do love it. I think we'll do our final cropping in Lightroom. I think we'll take a little off the bottom and a little bit off the left, and that will make the waterfall a little more prominent in the shot. We'll probably trim a little off the top as well. So do I like it? Yeah, I kind of do. There's some other things. No, there's nothing else I want to do. So I want to sharpen this. So in order to do that, I have to build these two together. I've got to take our overlay and background. So let's go to... So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten these two together, but I want to keep them just for posterity's sake, or if I want to go in and adjust this overlay mask. Let's hold down the Alt key and click on the layer menu, which is this little 3-line thing. And we're going to choose Merge Visible. And now keep in mind, I have the Alt key down, Alt or Option on your keyboard. And what that does is it creates a flattened layer, but I still have my other layers, rather than just doing a flatten. So this is the one I'm going to sharpen. So let's go up to Filter, and I'm going to go to Sharpen, and my favorite for landscapes is Smart Sharpen. And let's see, where do we want to look? Let's take a look down here in the ferns. And I can see I've got 300%. That's a lot, you would think, right? But it's not as bad as you think, because as long as you keep the radius below 1, it doesn't create any halos. Now, if I were to come up here, look at all the halos you create. Sometimes halos can be good, particularly if you're going to print on canvas. But if you're not, then that's way too much. However, you can come down a bit, and if you press on this zoomed in sample, it will turn it on and off, so you can see. And actually, strangely enough, the 1.5 is actually okay. I'm actually kind of liking what it's doing. It's adding a little more pop to the image than the 0.7 was. So let's hit OK on that. And is there anywhere I don't want this sharpening to happen? And that's the beauty of having this on a layer. Let's zoom in on the falls a bit, and let's turn that sharpening on and off. And is there anywhere it's offensive? And the answer actually is no. It actually looks fine everywhere. Alrighty, so we've made our edits. Let's hit Command S to save this, and we will go back tab over to Lightroom and take a look, and there is our PSD file. Again, if we compare it to what we started, we went from there to there. So now we look at the histogram, and now let's do a little bit of fine tuning, maybe a little more brightness. Let's bring the exposure up a little bit, and maybe add a little more contrast into it. And that's looking good. I'm thinking maybe even a little clarity. Now, I had mentioned about the crop. I think the rocks are overpowering the falls a bit. And if you want the rocks to be the subject, that's a valid option. But I'm going to hit the R key and bring up the cropping tool. And I'm going to crop it to what I think the image needs. I'm going to bring it in from the left and from the bottom and from the top, as I mentioned. And what that's going to do is make the waterfall more powerful in the scene. Is it dead center? Yeah, it is. But I think in this particular case, it actually works because the falls is pretty much straight up and down. So let's hit enter on that. And then let's come down to effects. And let's add a kind of just a standard vignette. And I like it. One more thing. Let's see if it needs one other thing. I'm going to come up to the mask, put in a radial gradient. Let's see if we want to add a little more spice to the waterfall. Right across through there and into the rocks as well. It'll put a diagonal bit of light in the image. Just a smidge. And I think we're done. So let's take a look at that full screen. And yeah, that's really quite beautiful. This is, by the way, Merrimere Falls in Olympic National Park. And when you consider, there's the raw file we started with, and it was exposed as well as possible because it was a very high contrast scene. But we took this and turned it into here. And it was really basically with two tools. We did our basic adjustments with Lightroom to get things in place, and then we brought it into Photoshop and did our light painting by using an overlay layer and painting with black and white on top of that. So this was another hybrid edit using Lightroom and Photoshop. We're going to go back into Photoshop and do some more images with light painting just by doing that same overlay effect, and I'm going to explore a couple of other options when you do that as well. Hope that was helpful. This is definitely something you can use in your images, and I will see you online again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.